I don't see the video for this.
Okay, it should be turning on now. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it didn't put you in as panelist.
Okay, I feel better. I don't see video for this one. It's just a blank screen. What am I missing?
Hang on one second. Oh gosh, I don't know which one it is. No, hang on, let's see if this works. Oh, is the slide closed on it for the camera?
Woohoo!
There it is.
All right. Can you hear it? Can you hear it?
Yes. Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, I'm gonna put the presenter back on mute. Let me know if you see something in between.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's running Zoom. That's all it's doing as far as I'm concerned. Pam?
Okay. I gotta pick one here.
This is a made in America medical grade mask.
But in order for everyone to hear you, you have to turn it back on and speaking to them.
Okay.
I noticed that some of them were off when I was walking by. If you have them still off, no one's gonna be able to hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. Quickly.
I probably don't.
You don't want my email.
They're down here.
I didn't think that was someone who said that like saying.
There's the one. Can I borrow your tea?
Yeah, I talk loud anyway, and so it's not. Brittany, that was the only part? Okay.
So, can I use?
Hey guys, I just wanted to do a quick test and make sure you guys can hear me loud and clear.
We can.
We can, yes ma'am.
Perfect. Thank you guys.
Okay. What are you not on the city Wi-Fi or something?
I'm working today. That happened to me the last meeting.
Well, you couldn't get on city Wi-Fi?
And then Ginger plugged me in upstairs. With her, and I could receive with the password, and then I'd be down here, and I was locked out. So that's why she had to come over here and get me out of hers and put me back in me.
Ginger?
Pretty cool stuff. Yeah.
I just didn't know where you were. You're fine. I just didn't know where you were sitting. Oh, now I see.
is, I'm just checking to make sure they can hear me on Zoom, Ginger, but it is 6 o'clock on October 7th, and I call to order this special called meeting of the Dunwoody City Council. Seeing any objections, seeing none, the meeting is called to order. Councilman Untitled, can you please lead us in the invocation and the pledge?
At this meeting, help us to make decisions which keep us faithful to our mission and reflect our values. Give us strength to hold to our purpose, wisdom to guide us, and a keen perception to lead us. And above all, keep us charitable as we deliberate. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're going to begin the public comment section of this meeting. If you are present and intend to speak, please fill out a card and hand it to our clerk back there who's raising her hand. Ginger, let's start with the online, please. Just the ones who had signed up ahead of time.
Okay, I do not show any of the ones that signed up ahead of time online at this moment. I do have a hand raised when you get to that.
Yeah, I'm going to do the people that are present who have filled out cards already.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Suzanne Huff, please.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Huff. I'm the Executive Director for Dunwoody Preservation Trust. And I would just like to reiterate past comments made in these meetings to please reconsider the road widening plans as specified in the Dunwoody Village Master Plan. To expand the roads as written would take a large majority of the green space from the Cheeks Grove farmhouse, rendering it practically useless. This property and farmhouse were a rallying point for our community 25 years ago and is a beloved landmark today. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. It's the unofficial symbol of Dunwoody. It is the center of this city's seal. If any part of the lawn would be taken for road widening, there would be no place left in the heart of our city for community celebrations such as Light of Dunwoody and other events. This place is known nationally, as we recently saw when we lost the large oak tree on the corner. Our Dunwoody community has worked too hard to save this property. Please do not destroy the small amount of land we have managed to save years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Brian Daldrill. Thank you.
Good evening, Brian Dodrill with Tacoma Robertson Dodrill here on behalf of Dunwoody Homeowners Association and the main parties that were listed in our impact statement filed with the city previously. I greatly appreciate that the plan with the overlay has moved forward, preserving and protecting the buffers that were put in place almost 40 years ago. Glad to see that that has been largely solidified around the existing buffers. The one concern that we have is the issue of the church and its addition into the overlay, primarily because it's not something that's really going to be up for redevelopment. And as the church tries to go forward and has to pull building permits or things like that, they're going to trigger compliance with the overlay, and the building may not be able to. And I understand that there's a variance process for it, that doesn't guarantee them their ability to continue to exist as they've existed for decades and will plan to exist for decades more to come. The concern that we have on that is the way it's been added in procedurally hasn't gone through and been vetted in the same way as the other parts of the plan have. And we would just ask y'all perhaps to take that out of what's going through. If the city decides later to put it in, but putting it in as it exists today is going to impact their continued ability to use the property as they pull permits to do anything. Thank you.
Scott Oster.
Good evening, my name is Scott Oster. Recently, we put a contract on 5054 and 5064 Nandina. I am an owner of Express Car Washes. We have car washes in communities all throughout Atlanta. When we did the research and we looked at the maps, it all shows it's zoned for C1, which we did. The research found out that that is permitted use for our concept. The owner is also present and he is on board with what we were going to do. We have since found out that there may be some rezoning happening and different things of that nature that would not allow us to do that. We're surrounded by already commercially zoned properties, daycare behind us, and different things of that sort. So we just wanted to come in and really try to find out where we stand on getting this permitted and what we need to do to move forward and decide, are we able to do this or not able to do it? And I also brought, we can make these things look however they need to. So it's not a matter of, the look or the green space. We can do anything like that that's needed to be done. We just ultimately right now need to find out, can we get it zoned properly or not, so that we can do our due diligence and get started. Thank you.
Thank you. It's not a two-way conversation. I'm sorry. It's
Okay. I understand.
thanks.
Thank you.
Ellen Holloway.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I'm Ellen Holloway, live at 5057 Trailridge Way, back up to the doggy daycare. You've heard from me before. I've met with some of you individually. Thank you so much for your time and your consideration and considering the homeowners' needs as well. I have previously spoken about the importance of the buffer for noise, light control, environmental impact. So I feel it's very, very important that it be preserved as large as possible. Current state would be ideal, if not the 130 plus, the 120 plus 30 buffer that's been mentioned. Also, I'm concerned about streets being allowed through the buffer. Remember in August, one was removed from Winter Hall, but also I would love if it said that in the future, roads could not be built through the buffer. And also, as we get today, is to reiterate what was previously said, that the church being back into the overlay is very concerning. Also, for neighbors who back out the amount of noise and the specific lights that are allowed, please take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Grossman.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the council and staff for including the buffers that were reserved in the 70s and continuing that preservation. That is appropriate. We did come to a compromise that for some people loses up to 70 feet of trees, but they've all pretty much agreed to the 150 feet max and 130 feet undeveloped and a 20-foot transition yard so that y'all can put in a westernmost road that will have a sidewalks on both sides of it. We're also hoping that the 20-foot transition yard that will is basically to allow the road to be graded and then on that side be put back into place. Can also become a linear park in the long run. That would be a very good spot for 1,000 or so foot linear park. It would complement the developments that would be across the street from it and would encourage the people in the branches and Winter Hall and so on to put in pedestrian paths to access it. which we hope to pursue after this is all locked down. But I will say that there's still a road shown running to Winter Hall that dead ends at the Colonial Pipeline. I had heard at the August 24th meeting that would be taken out of the map. It's still there. There's still text on the map that says this is allowed in the buffer. I don't understand why. I don't think there's any support in the community for it. Then that should be taken out. Along the Winter Hall top, that's from Shanley, Dunwoody over to the branches on the north side of Dunwoody Hall Shopping Center. There's an existing 75-foot buffer that's documented, but it's shown in the regulating map, but there's no text that speaks to it. There is text that speaks to the other buffers that we are preserving. And given that their text overrules the map, if it ever comes to a question, I'd be much more comfortable having text speaking to that buffer that runs along the north side of Dunwoody Hall. It should be preserved because it goes up to the Colonial Pipeline as the top edge. The last thing I'd like to mention is the church. In 2009, we took it out. Staff slid it back in for planning purposes, which I'd be okay with for knocking around plans. At the last meeting.
The 3 minutes is up.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you. All right, Ginger, how much? Ginger, you can see if anyone on the Zoom call would like to speak.
I have 2 people with their hands raised at this time. Someone named Jack Lane. You should be able to unmute and speak at this time.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, council members. My name is Jack Lane. I live at 5273 Brook Lake Drive, and I am the director at DPT, volunteer position, responsible for the Cheeks Brewel House. And as Suzanne has said, and I just want to reiterate, we are very supportive of whatever is selected to be done in the village overlay plan. And thank you for doing that. I think it's going to overall be terrific for our community. But we'd ask that whatever you do, if you'd please not encroach on any property of the Cheeks Brewel House. We're crowded there, and now on the other side of the street where the new urgent care, the Peachtree Immediate Care is going in, that's pretty close to the sidewalk. If there's any room left to take something from that side and just try to protect what I think we all respect, and it's certainly something that I've spent my time and energy on for the last few years, trying to keep it looking as nice as I possibly can for the community. So thank you for considering that. We appreciate it, and I hope you all have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Next, we have Felicia. You should be able to unmute and speak at this time.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. You might want to speak up a tiny bit more if you can, but we can hear you.
Is this good?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all hearing us again. I've been at several of the meetings. I live at 1205 Hidden Ridge Lane. That is in the, I live right on top. I'm one of those 2 houses that juts out right behind Publix. So we all about the 100 and that is great. The transition yard for where I am isn't sufficient because if you use the transition yard, that they would be able to cut trees that are protecting the lights and noises that come from the shopping center because of the close proximity. So I had passed out to all of you the agreement that was between the Dunwoody Homeowners Association and the public shopping center owners, as well as the original owners of this house. There was written language that described specifically the concerns that were all agreed upon because of our close proximity. And it was described in verbiage that, you know, the fence needed to be kept and the trees needed to be kept because of the close proximity. So I would ask that there is some text in the final version that protects our particular corner here because we're jutting out these two houses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ginger, is there anyone else?
Yes, we have one more person named Amy Little. You should be able to unmute and speak at this time.
Hi, this is Amy Little. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have all of the same concerns about the other homeowners who have spoken. I live in Winter Hall, and my primary concern in protecting our neighborhood, of course, the buffer, but additionally that road that continues to show that can be built through the buffer. So I was encouraged that it wasn't in one map, but unless I'm mistaken, it appears to be in a second map. So I'm very concerned about that since it shows that that road would terminate in my backyard. Also, I have Colonial Pipeline along my back fence on my property line. So I engaged Colonial Pipeline, talked with their VP of Operations, Wes Dunbar, who engaged their right-of-way group and legal group. So I've communicated with them, and they've let me know that if it continues to be planned that a road could be allowed to cross their Colonial Pipeline, that they would need to engage as well. So they absolutely do not support any road of any kind that would carry auto traffic crossing their pipeline. And so I want to make sure that that's a consideration, that would be another fight that would be brought in if a road were built across the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone else would like to speak, please raise your hand in the Zoom application. I do not see any more hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Before we start the discussion items, and just for everyone who's here tonight and listening at home, this is strictly a work session. We will not be taking votes. And council, in terms of the village plan, we absolutely do not have to sort all this out tonight. And I suggest we have 2.5 or perhaps a 3-hour maximum that we spend tonight. My personal goal would be to finish this by the end of the year. And we have 5 more regular meetings, as well as the ability to call additional work sessions if necessary. And with that, Sharon, do you need to read it?
Yes, Mayor. The first item is presentation of the comprehensive plan update draft. Richard McLeod.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'd like to introduce Eric Bozeman, who's going to just give you a brief update on the, I think it was 7 items that were amended from last week. And our goal is to get clearance to sign the letter of transmittal by the mayor to send the plan down to DCA and ARC for review. And then they will in turn send it back to us, where we will adopt it then, and we can still make changes even after we send it down there.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So good evening, Mayor and Council. Very briefly, we just want to recap what we were able to take from the September 29th council meeting when we presented the comprehensive plan update and received comments. We were able to boil those comments down, I believe, to 6 substantive changes in the comprehensive plan draft that is in your packet this evening. So to quickly highlight those, we went through the entire draft and updated the document maps with the appropriate labels. What we found is that our GIS produced maps still reflected labels from the previous version of the comprehensive plan and were not all updated and consistent. So all of those maps within the comprehensive plan now are updated and have the appropriate labels that match the text of the draft plan. We reviewed and updated the goal chart that is reflected both on page Roman numeral 4 and page 38 in the comprehensive plan draft. We updated goal number 1 to say maintain and enhance residential amenities and housing types within neighborhoods. That's reflected on page Roman numeral 2, page 10, and page 15 of the draft. I did notice this evening that there is a lower section of page Roman numeral 2 that has the old verbiage. We will update that prior to the submittal. We deleted office as requested from the suburban neighborhood character area future uses on page 21. We noted that expand housing choice and making aging in place an achievable reality is a goal in the comprehensive plan and applies to the full document and all character areas, but as requested, added aging in place appropriate housing options specifically to the 285 Peachtree Gateway character area on page 28. And we did delete the reference to a continuous turn lane on Mount Vernon that was a holdover that was still showing in the technical addendum. So those are the 6 changes that we made throughout the draft document and have before you this evening.
Any questions or comments? John?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for the changes. I've gone through the document and I was very happy with what I saw, so thank you.
So we don't need any action on this item. So I will get with you tomorrow, Mayor.
I think there's still questions and comments down here though, I'm sorry. But yes, I know we're not voting. I just need to sign it, but go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, Eric, from last meeting, you mentioned the terminology of suburban residential neighborhood character area. Are we going to stay with that terminology?
So we did leave the character area was called suburban neighborhood, and our intention was to leave the name of the character area. Where we went through the document and attempted to change suburban and urban to more descriptive language was in the narrative text within each of the character areas.
No further questions. Thank you.
Stacy? Jim?
I just have a quick question. I just want to confirm that information that was removed from the overall plan here is also removed from the underlying plans, for example, the transportation plan, that's been amended as well to remove that continuous turn lane. So I just want to confirm that everything's moving downstream, and if it's removed from the big plan, it's removed from the plans that it references.
So the date of adoption becomes really important. There's always, with almost every city that we work with, sort of this continuous tension of the most recent updated plan. We did confirm with Michael Smith with Public Works that the continuous turn lane was not in the most recent update of that project. So this reflects that, but you will continue to see sort of periodic conflicts that this plan calls for updating other city documents, and that will have to happen in turn.
All right, so just so council and the general, oh, go ahead, John.
Thank you. I have 2 more questions, if I may. The first one I asked at the last meeting, and that regards the Dunwoody United Methodist Church as well as First Baptist being put into the new zoning classifications. Eric or Richard, can you explain the benefit of why we're doing that? Is there some, those are 2 properties that are zoned in such a way that I don't understand why we're putting them into this overlay.
So with Dunwoody United Methodist, staff had recommended that we put it in the overlay. We have had several meetings with the church, including Monday night. I met with the executive council. And they voted after I left the meeting. They had a service tonight. I called Roger Young, the chief of the operating officer to get his feedback, and he did not return my call because he's out of town. But they are expected to be there on Monday. As I said, we could easily change the map after it's gone to ARC.
But what's the benefit to either us, the city, or to the property owners? If it is placed in there, correct me if I'm wrong, but the owner can keep the underlying zoning that's there to a certain extent. Explain the process. What's the difference? What's the benefit and the detriment to both the city and the property owner as far as being put in or taken out of these plans?
So one of the items is they have to abide by the R100 zoning. They're a church, which is allowed, but they have to abide by that, which allows them, for example, 60% of the lot can be taken up, but under the new overlay zoning, they could take up 80% of the lot. And also, there would like a parking deck, and you can't build a parking deck in residential zoning.
So there's benefits, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the property owner has the right to decide whether they're gonna keep it R100 or the new. How does that work? If they're put into the new overlay, how does it work when they want to put up they're gonna put up a parking deck, they're gonna say they're part of the new system. If they're want to do something else, they can say they're part of the R100. How does that work one way or the other?
Well, actually, the mayor and council imposed the zoning on them. It gets in a little bit of legal things. If you typically downzone them, they'll probably get upset and they may sue us. But I explained it that it would be beneficial because knowing that they want to do the parking deck and the extra developable space, it would benefit them.
Okay, but that's all right. Let's flip over then to the First Baptist. How is it beneficial to them in the sense of being in the overlay?
When we looked at the entire area along 285, and knowing that improvements are coming, we felt that that was such a huge piece of property, and most of it is parking area. We felt that it was wise to include it. Doesn't mean they have to change, but it just highlights that area.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out if there's a benefit to the government or benefit to the landowner one way or the other, or if there's detriments in what we're doing to the landowner.
In terms of the comprehensive plan, it doesn't change anything.
Okay. Next question goes about the universal design and aging in place. If you look at section 4.18 on page 50, there's a discussion about adding to the zoning for universal design. In section 4.2, we have a work plan, and that work plan gives an outline of what the city is going to be doing in the next 4 or 5 years to make this action work. And we don't have a work item in there for adding universal design to the zoning code. What's your thoughts?
Eric, do you have?
Yeah. There was previous reference to universal design and I believe a previous action item. We don't have need for a separate action item this time around because the action item that calls for a unified development ordinance would incorporate universal design as part of that.
I guess my question is then why don't we have in our work plan a action item to take that and to do that zoning action?
Yeah, that was sort of our intention that the unified development ordinance would do that. But I think if we want to specifically call out that one element, we certainly could.
All right, well, there's no reason to hold this up. If you thought the one bullet incorporated that, I wouldn't mind having it separated out for the next read in a month or whatever. I think the aging in place, the universal design is something that's important for this community as we move forward. And I think I would like to have it taken as a separate bullet point, but I defer to the rest of the council. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Anybody else?
So I'm fine with having a separate bullet point for universal design or a sub bullet point under the other thing, whatever works for staff. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah, so, and then we'll see this again after you get feedback back from the community affairs, is that correct?
Yes, ARC and Department of Community Affairs.
Okay, thank y'all for your time on this. We appreciate it. Anything else? No, thank you. Okay.
Mayor, the next item under discussion is number 2, Shanley, Dunwoody Road, Dunwoody Village Complete Streets Analysis. Michael Smith.
Good evening. As the village master plan has progressed, the city's been working at the same time on a concept plan for the Shanley Dunwoody Road corridor between Womack and Roberts Drive. The concept work's primarily being funded with $200,000 in federal funds through an ARC, Atlanta Regional Commission grant that the city was awarded prior to the start of the master plan process. The Shanley Dunwoody concepts aren't quite ready for public input. We think we'll be rolling that out probably next month and then bringing those full concepts to council. But certain aspects of the design probably should be discussed now in light of the discussions that have been going on around the road and the streetscapes and the questions that have come up through the hearings on the village master plan. The master plan includes visuals for proposed improvements on Shanley Dunwoody Road and Mount Vernon Road. The Shanley Dunwoody visual is labeled Exhibit A in Agenda Item 4. And the memo for that item states that the design is aspirational and needs to be flexible to allow for site conditions and constraints such as right-of-way limits. At the aspirational level, I think the master plan concept reflects a desire for pedestrian-friendly area with narrower lanes, wider sidewalks, and accommodations for bicycles and street trees. But taking a step closer to the conceptual design level, the Shanley Dunwoody project team has done the traffic analysis and begun overlaying proposed improvements on aerial plans with property lines and physical features shown. And what the project team is seeing is that level of detail, it would be best to separate the bicycles and pedestrians, primarily because of the master plan's recommendation for storefront along both sides of Shanley Dunwoody Road. If the future goal is to have outdoor dining, patios, retail stores along the sidewalk and have a high pedestrian traffic, then the best and safest experience for both pedestrians and bicyclists would be to separate the two. The safety aspects of our proposed plan are outlined in my memo, but I wanted to show some example photos that I think will illustrate why the separation of users is desirable from a practical as well as a safety standpoint. Can everybody see that picture?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Canton Street in Roswell. And the survey for the master plan, this was the visual that most embodied what the survey respondents wanted to see in Dunwoody Village. The sidewalks here are about 10 feet wide, but what I want to point out is that the sidewalk space quickly gets encroached on by outdoor dinings, the storefront features, and the actual walking path becomes narrow pretty quickly. The second most popular example in the survey was Dresden Drive in Brookhaven. Again, sidewalks start out wide, but they become constricted in places by storefront, which is manageable for pedestrians to navigate, but would be difficult, I think, to put pedestrians and cyclists in the same space. Here, the Brookhaven look at, put the bikes in the street with a bike lane there. So what the two concepts we're talking about, the bottom concept is what's in the village master plan currently, and then the top concept is what the Shanley Dunwoody project team has come up with. The road part of it is essentially the same between the curbs. Both concepts have trees along the street. The primary difference is the top concept shows a separate bicycle facility between the street trees and the sidewalk, separated by a narrower buffer. So this gives each user their own space. And the city of Decatur just completed a project on Commerce Drive that's very similar to what we're talking about. I've got some pictures of that here. The cycle track is on the left. It's at sidewalk level, but it's separated from the street and it's separated from the pedestrians by the trees and the light poles. The primary difference between the concept we've developed and this is that the trees in our concept are out by the street, and here they're between the cycle track and the sidewalk. You can see here's at an intersection. They even have some colored pavement and some signage showing the pedestrians to the right and the cyclists stay to the left. Again, you can see the sidewalk with the storefront, the benches and things like that. It does, it is narrowed at places. That sidewalk looks to be about 10 feet wide at least, but it narrows up where you have the storefront features. I want to note too that, this Commerce is a 4-lane road, but when you're down there as a pedestrian, you don't feel like you're on a really busy road because you're so far, the pedestrians are removed from the roadway by on-street parking, the cycle track and the trees. So I think it creates a good pedestrian experience. Just some more pictures of that streetscape. And Commerce is, I think, similar to Shanley Dunwoody, and it does have higher traffic than some of the other examples, and it kind of carries traffic through Decatur as well as into Decatur, sort of just like Shanley Dunwoody does in Dunwoody Village. And so, the project team working on the Shanley Dunwoody project is recommending the top concept, which would separate the cyclists and pedestrians. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, and I think you need feedback too, or you don't?
Yeah, I think the master plan verbiage says that it's aspirational and it will have to be adjusted. But I thought it was important to point out what we're finding on Shanley Dunwoody as we lay the project out. And my concern was that if you just look at the graphic, what we're proposing is slightly different than the graphic, even though the text in the says that it's aspirational and will be adjusted. So just wanted to have that discussion now before we present full detailed concepts to the public.
All right, thank you. John.
Thank you, Michael, for the presentation. Can you explain to us, I know we've sort of had this discussion regarding the corner of Mount Vernon and Chamberlain Dunwoody Road. At one point, I think a couple council members actually wanted to see an overlay, a visual of where these types of plans and how it would affect the corner and the right of ways on the corner. If you can't pull that up, can you give us an overview of what the corner of Chamberlain Dunwoody and Mount Vernon is going to look like?
let me try to share a different part of my screen here. This is the aerial of the area you're talking about there. That's one of the tightest parts of Shanley Dunwoody Road, the narrowest places. We have federal money on the Shanley Dunwoody project, so the farmhouse on the corner we would try to avoid as much as possible because it would probably be considered a historic resource, and there'd be additional steps we'd have to go through with the federal money. But just zooming in here, I think it's important to point out that either concept, this is going to be a pinch point, and we may have to make some adjustments or compromises in the design to avoid the properties on both sides. Just laying out what either concept as it is, if we avoid the farmhouse completely, we probably get into the parking of the commercial properties on the other side, which would then become an expensive right-of-way proposition. They have so little parking now that if you start impacting that parking, you may end up having to buy the whole parcel.
Can you explain the orange lines? Is that the right-of-way lines, is that the property line? Where's the right-of-way?
Yes, the GIS here, the right-of-way lines don't completely line up with the aerial photography. We've already checked this, and that property line is more in line with the end of the parking spaces. It's sometimes when you overlay the parcel layer on the aerial, things don't line up exactly, and this is one of those cases. The parking, we don't believe from the research we've done so far that the parking is actually in the right of way.
All right, thank you. I just had questions on as far as that intersection. We've seen drawings of roundabouts. We've seen a number of ideas. Just for yourself, what's the thought of the roundabout? Is that doable or not doable?
We're working on a concept for that. I think it's going to be, I'm not going to say impossible, but it would be very challenging. You probably would have to buy a couple of parcels on one of the corners to make that work. But that's part of what we will be presenting when we roll the full concept out to the public is we'll have a couple of different concepts for the roadway and the intersections and a potential roundabout. But what we're kind of focusing on here is what's happening with the bicyclists and pedestrians behind the curb, because the other options that we're going to lay out in the concepts have to do more with the roadway itself.
And one final question, the new property that's going up at 5419 on the corner, so basically zero lot line, how does that affect the sidewalks and infrastructure in the sense of laying out future pedestrian investment in that area?
Which property was that? I couldn't quite hear that.
Southeast corner, the new medical building that's going on.
Yeah, that was permitted prior to all this, and they are required to put in a 12-foot sidewalk there. So I think, when we do this future project, we may have to make some adjustments there, but there's enough room where the building's going to go to make any adjustments we need to make.
All right, thank you.
Joe?
So Michael, in keeping everyone's time focused, we're just focusing on this one aspect, right? You're going to be coming back because I sent you an email with several thoughts on other items regarding not just the open road, right? So you're going to present that and we can sift through all the other things, correct?
Yes, yeah. When we'll present, we're probably going to present 2 or 3 different concepts for the whole corridor as far as the roadway piece of it. All the concepts that we've developed so far show the bicycles and pedestrians being separated like we're talking about here. But we'll present a variation of that concept for different improvements for the roadway and the intersections. And so those other aspects could be incorporated into that discussion. The public and the council is going to get an opportunity to comment on the whole corridor when we go through that process.
Sure, fair enough. So, yeah, I definitely have. Okay. So, yeah, I definitely appreciate separating bicycles and pedestrians in a high traffic area. So appreciate that design. And all I have to say, again, I sent you an email with all the different items that I want to talk about, but overarching, number one should be safety and traffic calming. Safety for the most vulnerable users, traffic calming, pedestrian friendly. That's what I'd love to see. And I'd like to see similar standards on Mount Vernon as well as Shanley Dunwoody to have that same look and feel, the same interaction of the users. Thank you.
Stacy, you have anything? Tom?
Yes. Yeah, Michael, just a couple of quick questions on the concept plan. First of all, I'll just give it a thumbs up as far as that would certainly be my preferred of the two that have been presented. I think it's, you know, as Joe has already mentioned, the separation of the bicycles and pedestrians and the safety that goes along with that is great, especially for an area we're hoping will be a lot of foot traffic and bike traffic as well. So as far as that concept plan, there's an indication that the median will be landscaped wherever there's not a turn lane. So is there also a thought to use those landscape medians as pedestrian crossings as well, as part of a refuge for pedestrians to cross Shanley Dunwoody? Is that part of the plan?
Yes, that's the benefit of having the turn lane / landscape median is it does give you an opportunity to put in those pedestrian crossings. Most guidance that you see out there about pedestrian crossings is that having a median, even if it's not a marked crosswalk, improves pedestrian safety over having a multi-lane crossing without a median.
Okay, and hopefully we'll have enough opportunities along that stretch to have more median than turn lane, but I know that'll be a part of the planning process. When you were pointing out Commerce Street, and you said that the trees were between the bikes and the pedestrians. I kind of like the idea of having the bikes, the trees where we have them between the road and the bikes, offering just an additional layer of protection for the cyclists as well. However, it does show, it looks like there is still some sort of transition or buffer between the bikes and the pedestrians on the sidewalk. It looks like some flowers there, but is that going to be a curved transition or separation, or would that be something similar to what you showed us with the Commerce Street, where it was all at one level?
Our concept is basically identical to the Commerce, with the trees and the shrubs, the trees and the grass along the road flipped. So in our, the only difference from the picture here is that the trees are out by the road, and that little strip of green by the road would be some kind of buffer between the cycle track and the sidewalk. And it's narrower than where the trees would be.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And then the only other comment, and this might be more for when we get into the village overlay part, is I know the village has the concept plan, which is below it. I don't know if there's any value in swapping out for the new multimodal part of the village overlay, or because it says it's conceptual, it's not necessarily important, but just wondering what your thoughts are. Keep it as is, or update the village overlay with the multimodal in there. I don't know if Richard, is it better for you to answer that one?
it sounds like Michael and I are a hair apart. 90% of what we agree on. The placement of the trees. If you move them on to the other side, because I like the one on Commerce Drive, because it provides shade for the pedestrians as well. But I don't think that anything needs to change, because we say that this is an aspirational plan and it's going to be up to the engineers. So.
Okay, just figured I'd ask while we had you both here.
Yeah.
That's all I have, thanks.
And I'll add, I think it's okay either way where the trees go, whether you want to put them out by the road or between the cycle track and the pedestrians. I think that's the decision that the community or the council could make. To me, the critical thing was separating the two uses. I think there's flexibility on where the trees can go.
One area that you didn't touch on, Michael, was that the utilities are all above ground there. And as I understand it, we're not asking for them to be put underground. So I
guess
I think we should, but that's a decision that you all have to make.
Yeah, our project is not proposing to put them underground simply just from a cost standpoint, as we found in Georgetown that it becomes more costly than what we had money to do. But I guess if their redevelopment occurs, I think the code would require them to put them underground then, possibly.
Yeah, I think what we said is that the city would, along Shanley, Dunwoody, because the power company is not going to want it underground as each property develops. So the city should probably pursue that if that was the direction that we wanted to go.
Yeah. Jim, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
No answer. So I think this was something along the lines of what Tom was saying. Is it possible to change the setback slightly so that some of the concerns about pedestrians, cyclists, and what we hope will be restaurant patios can be minimized? I guess that's really a Richard question, knowing it's aspirational and all that jazz.
Well, they can build it right up to the sidewalk, or they could build it 10 feet back. So the sidewalk could be probably 28 feet or something like that.
All right.
So
So
that's
Michael,
already.
do you need
planned
anything
to it.
from us? Or do you need?
I'm sorry.
Do you need feedback from us tonight? Or you?
What sounds like what I'm hearing is the separation, council's wants to see that the separation and the different aspects of the design can be worked out as we go through the process, and that we're going to leave the concept as it is in the master plan, knowing that it's aspirational.
And Michael and I agree that we should separate the pedestrians and the bicycles, and it's just how we do that.
Right. And as to the corner of Shanley, Dunwoody, and Mount Vernon, as I have personally talked about a lot as we've gone through planning for trails and sidewalks, that sometimes, because we're a built environment, we can't always get in the end the perfect product. And so we may have to have a traditional sidewalk in places where we cannot acquire the right of way, and it changes the path. And I think, generally speaking, people can manage that pretty well. On every observation I've seen, every place I've seen it happen. So I think we have solutions available to us. So
Yeah, I think the right of way on the map we had or the last meeting, 60-75% of it is 100 feet. So it's only those little areas that we have to deal with.
right. Okay. All right. Thank y'all. Thank you, Michael.
The next item is review and consideration of new Dunwoody Village District zoning regulations, chapter 27. It's TSW.
And council, it's okay if you stray into number 4 and 5 with your questions. And additionally, I spoke to Richard earlier today, and Eric, and if you have questions as the presentation is going on, feel free to ask them as opposed to waiting until the presentation completes. So, because again, we may or may not finish all this tonight. Thank you.
I just want to start by first going over the buffers. We did have a conversation with staff and the legal team. They feel like it's a defensible position with the 150-foot buffer. So that we would ask that you pass the buffer of 130 feet with an additional 20 feet that can be disturbed but replanted, as Mr. Grossman mentioned. Also wanted to go over the revisions from the February draft. The regulating map was updated as follows. The new north-south street between Publix and the Shanley Dunwoody Road that extended towards Winchell Hall Lane was removed. The reason that they're probably seeing it, they could be looking at the red line version, but the map that's in there does not have that in there. Also, the widened buffer was added to the DV1 parcels west of Chamberlain Dunwoody Road. The townhomes were removed as a permitted building type, along with the use table in DV2 and DV4, which is a question that Councilman Hannigan asked at the last meeting. We also revised the phrase "in order established" was changed to "in order to establish." And the townhomes were removed as a permitted building type in DV2 and DV4 to align with the use table. And Caleb Resicott is here to share anything.
Are you doing a presentation or we're just to ask you questions?
No, Madam Mayor, I wasn't planning a presentation. We thought that this would be more of a conversation based on the feedback. I would like to say, in addition to the points that Richard mentioned, which we have adjusted based on previous feedback, there was a comment made at the last council meeting regarding whether or not artificial turf would be appropriate in open spaces. And then I believe another comment regarding whether single family should be considered in the district as well.
Okay. So to the artificial turf question, we visited Alpharetta recently. We saw an example of that. Does anybody on council have strong feedback? To me, that's like the easiest, lowest hanging thing we can take care of.
I prefer natural.
Okay.
It's permitted, it's fine.
Right. They can use it if they want, right? Okay. Whatever. Okay, so I think, yeah, I don't even, yes. Okay. And then, Richard, can you or Caleb talk about, well, I'll let other people go first. Yeah. Okay, can you talk, my concern is residential density. And where it's allowed and where it isn't. So can you focus on that for us? Do you need to pull up a map? I don't think I can share, but maybe y'all can share.
Yeah, I think Caleb had done the last meeting. He had done his presentation workflow map, predicting that we could generate about 3,000 residential units over the entire 60 acres. That is probably not realistic, but mathematically you could make it work. I've done this in 3 cities, and it doesn't even come close to Woodstock, we did this, and it was 13,000 homes we could do in that area, and we have 1/10 of that.
Okay, but we're not, just, anyway, okay, so, but I'd like, can you pull up a map so that people at home can see where I'm asking questions from, just the district map perhaps? You have
Yeah.
a way to share that?
Give me a second here.
Draft, it's page, I mean, for example, page 7 would work, I think. Page 8. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so can you start by giving us an overview of residential and what's allowed in each of the DV zoning?
Sure. Give me a second to pull up the district use area, use provision. So before you is an overview of the proposed district. And as mentioned, there are 3 different sub areas. We'll start with DV1, which is the village commercial, which is in the purple today. This would be a mixed-use district that would allow for townhomes effectively. It would allow for multi-unit with a special land use permit. And then it would allow condominiums by right. And then age-restricted residential. So all of that would be in the purple district, generally limited to 3 to 4 stories, although there is a height limit that would apply adjacent to the single family. So that's the DV1. The DV2, which is sort of the orange areas, there's a little bit off of Center Drive, and then most of it is the office properties on Mount Vernon. Those are currently zoned office, institutional office type uses today, and they would continue with that under the proposed district. So the only residential uses that would be permitted in those would be upper story lofts or condominiums or apartments. And as with DV1, any residential uses in those districts would require a special land use permit. Again, so that's the office. The third sub area is the Dv3 Village Residential, which only applies to 3 areas. It applies to the townhomes that are already on Dunwoody Village Parkway. It does potentially apply to the Dunwoody UMC, which I know we had heard about earlier this evening. And then it would apply to the property that I believe is the School Art Center on South Chamberlain Dunwoody Road. That would be a residential district very similar to what the current density is in the townhomes today. So townhomes would be permitted. Multifamily rental would be permitted by special land use permit, and then multifamily owner occupied would be allowed by right. And then the final district is also a mixed use district. It is the sort of pink. This is the village center area, and this would have similar uses to the village commercial, except that the height would be 1 additional floor. So we're talking about commercial, we're talking about multifamily uses with any rental requiring a special land use permit from council. And as Richard mentioned, per the clarification at the last meeting, townhomes would not be permitted in this particular district. So townhomes would only be allowed where they are generally today. So within the townhome developments and then within the DV1 area today.
Well, he has.
And then as
Go ahead, Caleb. I'm sorry.
And then as Richard mentioned and was briefed at your last meeting, we did try to conduct a carrying capacity of how much development, residential development, this scenario would allow. So what we did is we used the GIS data to assign likely physical carrying capacities to all the properties in the village that were likely to develop, not taking into consideration market forces or the cost of construction or anything like that. And under that sort of worst case, most aggressive scenario, we estimated as many as 3,000 unit carrying capacity. Now, obviously, whether or not the market can finance any of those is a separate question. But that's what the code, as written, could theoretically support if the market aligned with it.
Can you leave the map up, maybe?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry about that. Give me a second.
So just to be clear and to clarify for myself, and anybody listening and that's interested, by right, what residential property could be redeveloped without coming through a zoning process? If we were to adopt the plan as written today, by right, what residential property could be developed?
So you could build,
zones.
okay, you could build townhouses in, by right, in DV1 and DV3, so purple and 3. And then you could build multifamily by right in, if they were owner occupied, in all of the districts. If they were rental, they would require a special land use permit in all of the districts as drafted.
So I was the person that asked about single family homes. And while I think economically it's probably not feasible, we're writing a plan that's going to long outlast most of us probably. And I wonder about allowing single family homes potentially in the office as an office use, but specifying if we can find a definition of zero lot, master on main, something specific. If that's too specific, then it's too specific. But knowing that the market forces may never allow it, but allowing a potential use for that there. And the brown, orange, is it orange? DV2.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those who can't see the right color. So just knowing that it may never happen because of the underlying costs, but just putting it out there as a potential, perhaps.
So that would be in addition to what's already there.
It would be an additional potential use.
And Madam Mayor, the way I would recommend we do that is we do have a townhome product. We could hold the houses to the same design standards as the townhomes, but allow them to be detached. That would probably be the easiest outcome, because these aren't going to be typical Dunwoody single family. These are going to be more of a detached townhome type of single family, I would imagine.
That's fine. And then staying on residential. So for me, just the mere mention of 3,000 units causes my blood to run cold. And understanding that the current market might not ever allow that, it doesn't necessarily mean that 10 years from now, for whatever reason, a future market might allow it. Plus, when you allow density, the underlying value of the land matters less. And I can't speak for the entire council, but I can speak for myself, and what my vision of the village is not 3,000 units of housing. It's not necessarily 1,000 units of housing. And so how do we tighten, from my perspective, again, one vote, one voice, how do we tighten this up so that it's clear to future development? Because for me, I don't, we visit, so let's talk about Alpharetta, because we visited Alpharetta downtown. It's one place, I understand that. There's lots of different examples. Those of us on council and all of us probably in our traveling years before COVID have seen. But when you look at the core of Alpharetta, where they have one apartment complex with ground level retail, which is restaurants and retail and services. And then they have freestanding retail. That to me is kind of what I envisioned the center of, and green space and a fountain. In case anyone didn't know that's the fountain. That to me is very much more reflective of what I envision the center of the village to be. Not, Canton Street is not a great example. Decatur's not a great example because they were organic and they were there already. Is it sufficient to require SLUP, or is it better to allow by right much less housing? Alpharetta said it was 8 units per acre, which is not what we have, right? If we can get to 3,000 units, we must be at, oh, sorry, I'm talking too close. We must be at much more than 8 per unit for the village as a whole.
Yeah, what they said in Alpharetta was that it was overall, it was about 8 units. I've got the numbers here that I asked for. They have 1,600 current total units that have been built since 2007. But there's an additional 136 are under construction, an additional project that's been approved that has 44 houses. So it's about 2,000 residential units.
Right, but in the core part of it, because we aren't downtown Alpharetta, we can talk about it. We don't have the traffic counts. The underlying land costs are very different. And the things I loved the most about Alpharetta were the homes that surrounded it. They weren't apartments. I mean, they had the apartments in the middle. They were very nice. It was less, I think, than 200 units. I think it was 100 and something, 160 or something.
168 apartments.
Right. Out of all those. And so how we maintain first and foremost, it is a commercial center of Dunwoody. It is the convenient shopping center. The Publix grocery store is essential to people's ability to live efficiently in that part of town. The Walgreens, all that is important. So how do we come up with a plan that gets us where we want and without the potential of 3,000 units of housing? So for me, if down the road, a developer wants to come in, they can come for a rezoning, right? There's nothing in this plan that prevents a rezoning or does it. 10 years from now, 15 years from now, some other council sitting here. Because what I don't want to project to the development world is bring it for free. I don't want to idea out there that Dunwoody is looking for thousands of units of housing, because I can only speak for myself, but I don't know that most on council think that's a good idea for the village anyway, or period. Yeah. So what steps
Madam,
would you recommend? Go ahead.
As Richard is aware, I actually wrote the code for downtown Alpharetta, and Eric Bosman was also part of that process. And we had very similar conversations during this effort. Obviously, they had very similar concerns to those that are being expressed this evening. After a lot of back and forth there, the policy decision that was made was that the code would not specify any number. That would be, there were several on council who felt that that would be setting a target that developers could shoot for. So in Alpharetta, anything that was a multifamily product requires a special land use permit. Whether it's rental, whether it's owner occupied, they really don't, they require both of them to perform for that. And they do not have a density in the code because they were worried about creating a target that people think they have the ability to shoot for. So it's just open-ended. That may be one option. Brookhaven, which is a peer community, we did a similar code around on Dresden Drive and then the Brookhaven MARTA area. And in that community, what they decided to do was to set a relatively low unit per acre basis. I don't remember the exact number. And then anything above that did require a special land use permit. So that would be another option that council could consider.
Is there, so right now we require SLUPs for any potential rental.
Right.
And
I'll go to that page.
But not all multifamily. So if it's condominiums in the center of the village, they don't have to get, is that correct, the SLUP?
That's correct.
Right. So in Alpharetta, they adopted a plan, but rezoned each parcel as it became developable. Am I remembering correctly?
I think what they did is they adopted the master plan, and people came in with specific ideas and they zoned it for that idea.
Okay. And what is the advantage of us adopting both a plan and a zoning code? Or the disadvantage of adopting just a plan?
Let me just say, from my perspective and listening to the landowners, you need to come out clearly and say we're going to allow residential units, either in the plan or in the code. It isn't clear. So.
Okay. All right, I'll let other people ask.
And
Go ahead.
If I may, I would like to point out that there are many other things in this code other than the use provisions. We have worked very closely with the community in terms of establishing streetscape requirements, in terms of establishing, I think, what are some very strong open space standards, even in terms of, as you know, working with the adjacent property owners on the buffers. I would highly encourage you, if there is a concern about the residential density, to come up with a strategy for that as a use, because there's so much more to the code than just enabling that. It has many design elements that the community has, quite frankly, told us they want, that we've put in here that are not available today.
No, absolutely, I understand that. And there's a lot of really good with the code. My main concern is density of housing for lots of reasons. We have some key infrastructure challenges. And like Richard pointed out, I think we just have to communicate carefully to developers. And I understand that we need to add some housing in the village because we don't get the amenities we want without housing probably. We need more people that live there, but we don't. I know I keep coming back to it, but you said it. We don't need 3,000 units of housing. I don't think we need 1,000 units of housing. So, and it's important when you look at a place like downtown Alpharetta or even downtown Woodstock, the geography is different. The road traffic counts are different. There may not be demand for 3,000 units of housing on Mount Vernon at Shanley Dunwoody, but I don't want to find out. So I don't want us to face challenges or a future council to face challenges. So for me, because there's so much about this plan, like you said, there's a lot more to it. My goal is to continue to energize Dunwoody Village. Having people live there is part of it, but the number is not 3,000. And so how do we fix that? Do we require all residential? Do we say we welcome, residential applications, but every process has to go through a SLUP? I mean, I don't know how we fix it. Do we take residential out of, for example, do we take residential out of, I've got to get back to the map, sorry.
Oh, sorry, ma'am.
No, it's okay, I have it in front of me. Do we take residential out of, I'm almost there, out of the purple, for example, the DV1 commercial? As a potential use, not that they couldn't come in and ask for a rezoning, but do we just take it out from our perspective and say, you know, if we're gonna have residential, we really want it to be in the center? How is it, what tools should we use? Because while I appreciate that we've incorporated a lot of what the public wants in this plan, we've incorporated a lot, they don't want thousands of units of housing. Not right now, anyway. And so, you know, how do we fix that component so we're sending the right message to people who might be interested in developing or redeveloping some of this property? You know, what's the fix? And then along those lines, there, when you talk about retail on the first floor, right? Is that required of all multi-story residential that's not townhomes?
It is only required in the following situations. If it's on one of these streets that are storefront streets, there would have to be commercial. And then in the DV, which is the office, there is a requirement that the units have to have ground floor commercial. And then later on in the code, there is what we call a concurrency requirement, which says that, let me find the exact number, if you bear with me for a second, that the larger projects, for example, in DV4, they have to have multiple use categories. So they couldn't come in and do all of a residential project if they had more than 15,000 square feet. And then in DV1, it says a maximum of 75% of the floor area in DV1 shall be residential. So in the purple, there really is a minimum 25% commercial requirement.
I'm gonna let some other people ask questions. John, go ahead.
Okay.
The residents of Dunwoody that already live here are looking for amenities. We have an issue with the amount of density that we have in the city right now, in the sense of what's allowed by right, in the sense of rezonings that are already on the books. When we look at High Street, when we look at the availability of other developments that come into the city. Dunwoody Village. If we want amenities, we're probably gonna need some people. That's a given. If you want the restaurants, if you want the nightlife, if you want any aspect of to energize the village, you need people. When you look at the different areas, what's available and what's going to be turned over faster, what's developable, and then when we look at things like Dunwoody Village 1, the purple, right now we allow townhomes by right. Can you imagine if the public shopping center sold to a developer and they put in 300 townhomes right there? You just imagine, we would be allowing it by right. Is that what we really want? So we got to be careful in what we're doing. It's just a matter of how we want to do it. The other issue that we have is aging in place. My parents sold their big, family house and to my sister, and they moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo. You park underneath that building. There's washer and dryer in the unit, and there's a whole lot of, elderly people in that building. And they all meet outside and they all talk out on the grassy knoll outside. They all have balconies. It's a beautiful place to live, and across the street's a grocery store. That is good, easy living. They can lock it up, and there's snowbirds, and they fly off to Florida in the winter. We don't have that. We don't have much of that, I should say. Dunwoody Village is probably a place for that. If the DV1 right now has some commercial, we want that commercial. We want that energized area to remain energized. But if we only allow townhomes in that area, that's a mistake. We probably want to make sure that we have the people to serve the energizing or the commercial below it. Stacked flats would be an idea that we have not talked much about, whether it be owner occupied or rental. We've gotten a notification from staff that right now they think 3,000 is the maximum amount of density that would be in the village. What we don't have from a city perspective is what is the maximum density for the city of Dunwoody? Right now, we're at about a 50-50 split between owner occupied and rental. And I'm just not sure. I know some communities might have a study where they only permit so much residential to come forward in any given year. And we may want to look at things from that perspective. So again, I want Dunwoody Village to grow, to emerge, and how we do that, I think the plans that are on paper do a lot of that. I understand the concerns for the density, but I also am hearing that we need change. And how do we mandate one without the unintended consequence of the other? So that's kind of where we're at.
Right. John, was anything else?
I mean, I like a lot what's in the plan, but how do you mandate something without the unintended consequence where if you allow townhomes in the purple, look at all the purple. Can you imagine if that was filled with townhomes only? Where's our commercial? Where's that energy that you're looking for?
True. Joe?
I sort of just wanted to make a point of order. If we want to really have a conversation, if we could kind of deviate from the norm of having one person on the mic speaking, and then another person goes and speaks in series. If we could be a little more interactive. So I'd like to just open that up possibly. So if one of our peers brings up an item, we can kind of maybe go round table on that one item and then go to the next. Would that be fair enough?
That's
Thank
fine. I
you.
mean, that's the
Okay,
plan.
so let me go back. So you mentioned houses, single family. I'd like to also open up the option. Look at that's LaFrance Walk. Do a Google search. I'd ask my folks to do that, and Richard and folks. It's a developer in Atlanta, and he did this really like 0 lot line. Some of the houses only have one car garage. A couple of the places only have like no garage. And I would also like to open up the option of potentially having duplexes. All right. And think about accessory dwelling units. If we want to talk about aging in place, and you really want to do that, and you want to have somebody live in a 1,000 square foot building behind you at your mother-in-law, you know, I'd like to just have that as a conversation as well.
Except that I did my graduate thesis on aging in place, and accessory units are great, but not where you already have lots that are this size. You know, that's for the village, we're not taking traditional Dunwoody lots and saying it's okay to put a house behind them. We're trying to take commercial space and perhaps convert it to duplexes or single family 0 lot homes, detached townhomes, whatever it is. That, you know, we're not looking at houses that are lots that are going to be big enough to have a second lot on them, probably.
Right. So aside from
Right,
the other
but the other
options,
things are fine.
just to keep that open.
Yeah.
And then just the generic statement as well as I'm really looking at the outcome to make sure that, you know, Alpharetta, they bought all that land, right? I want to make sure that the citizens in Dunwoody know that it is apples and oranges in looking at comparison. And their land value was very much less. And they started with having park bonds early on, 10 years ago, that they started buying some land for. Then they used some general funds to start buying the land. They bought all that land. Public dollars went in and acquired everything, and then they were in control. It's kind of like what we did at Project Renaissance, right? So that's kind of the model what Alpharetta did. I don't see us going in and buying all of Dunwoody Village. Right? So just remember that as well. But so what I want to make sure is looking at the outcomes of market forces. Is this 100% private developer? Is there some type of public-private partnership? If we ever do skin in the game, we're going to make sure that the partner that works with us is doing their fair share as well, right? If we're ever going to put in public dollars. So I'm just going to I'm always just going to go back to showing me the real world examples of where this has been a success. Whatever we're going to approve, I want to make sure that we can achieve success. That's where I am. Thank you. I mean, and like John said, the livable, walkable, exciting, active place. Thank you.
Whoever wants to jump in, I can't see Tom over the screen, so. Go ahead.
A question to Caleb or Richard. To get to the 3,000 unit number that none of us want. So basically what you did was calculate the amount of land, what was allowable, and turn everything into residential. Or how did you get to
that? That is correct. If I may, I can share the actual slide with you.
Sure, that would be great.
See if I can. Give me a moment here. I'm Zoom incompetent sometimes. Here we go. So should be this one. Can everyone see that?
Can you zoom in on
Here we go.
That's what you want us to look at.
Yeah, I'm going to try to make it larger. Okay. Sorry, I have a very slow computer. There we go. So what you'll see here is there's a chart with the 4 districts, and what we did is we sort of broke up properties in the village into 4 different types based on size. So there was 1 under an acre, 1 of 1 to 10 acres, and 1 over 10 acres. So we calculated those for all of the sub areas, all of the proposed districts, and then we made some adjustments based on our understanding of recent history of the properties or other things. So for example, in the DV1, actually in all of them that were DV1 or DV2, we took out any sites that were under 1 acre because we knew that it was very unlikely that someone would ever come in and buy a SunTrust Bank, for example, and tear it down to build 4 or 5 condos. That just doesn't happen too often. So anyway, we took out sites like that. We took out Sproul Hill, the Dunwoody Village townhomes, the churches. And then from that, we came up with an adjusted acreage and then determined based on the permitted building height and building types, what kind of density you would have. So it's relatively grounded in reality, but again, we didn't consider economics of that. So we did that model for the entire village.
And my next question is, in Alpharetta, since you know this, so you had to do a slot for any multifamily residential. Would that have included townhomes?
I don't recall. I don't think so. Richard, do you recall when you were
I
there?
don't remember.
Okay. I mean,
but I can certainly look that.
I mean, that's definitely intriguing to look at it that way. And then the other thing you said was in Brookhaven, they did a low density per acre, and then you had to do a slot from there. In our proposed code, we don't have a density per acre, right? It's just, did I miss it?
Correct.
Okay.
No, there is not one. There is, because this district uses the building form standards, those are really the same thing as density per acre. So as you all know, when we get into the code, we have different building type standards, and I'm zooming to them in a second. And each of those has a percentage of lot coverage, it has a percentage of building height, and all of that more or less falls into we can extrapolate a density per acre based on that, but it's not exact because as you recall, we are requiring a certain percentage of properties to be set aside as open space. And so those are immediately set aside, and then you use your building standards to determine the kind of a form that you can have based on that remaining land. And that form on that remaining land sets the density.
Okay, so then I want to go back to Lynn's question of, it sounds like we didn't give ourselves enough tools in our code to limit residential density in the village, or did we? Like, and if we didn't do it,
right?
So if we didn't do it, then what do you propose that we do? Do we follow Alpharetta? Do we follow Brookhaven? What do you propose that we do?
Well, I would remind everyone that this is a policy decision. I think as elected officials, you're going to have to consider the trade-offs long and hard. As has been noted throughout the entirety of this process, there has been a conversation about making the village more than just a sort of standalone commercial district. And part of that vision has been creating a live, work, play district where people who may want to downsize can move, people who may not want the upkeep of a house can move, and do that in a walkable setting. I think that the options that I put forth, which would be a special land use permit for any multifamily, or I think that's legally the cleanest. I think once you start doing things like other cities have done where you throw out numbers and then you say, well, there's a slump above a certain number, but not below it, that becomes more challenging to sort of back up if the council ever denied it. But as you know, the special land use permit criteria are pretty broad. And so I would recommend a scenario, if you wanted to, where you use that as a tool. I think that gives you a great degree of legislative discretion in considering cases. But again, whether or not to do that is going to be based on how open for business, if you will, do you want Dunwoody Village to be? Are you trying to make it so hard that the only businesses that make financial sense are sort of the single-story commercial, or do you want to set up a policy that supports more intense development? And as Richard can tell you, there is a precedent across the region for proactively coding what you want. I know Woodstock's done that. I know a lot of other communities have done that. But there's also the policy consideration on your point. So that's as good of an answer you're going to get from me. It's your call at the end of the day.
I am satisfied. Thank you. And I will say I am amenable to adding the single detached homes in the DV2, just knowing where they are in the maps, that actually they abut some R100s and single family homes, and it would actually, it might not ever happen, but it's also a good transition, I feel. Yeah.
Just a quick comment on all that. I mean, so, on the one hand, we're trying to encourage redevelopment that's sort of headed in a direction we'd like to see it headed. On the other, a slump for a developer represents uncertainty. Uncertainty means risk. Risk impedes development. And I just want to put that out there for everybody to think about explicitly, because, it may, to the extent we can do this without slumps, we're probably better off if we want the redevelopment to occur. And I just wanted to, put that on the table for consideration.
So I would be okay if there was some residential by right, but I'm really concerned about the potential. So if we look back to how the Southeast came out of the recession 10 years ago, and we look at what was built in most places across the Southeast, it was the 5-story wraparound apartments, and not just in the Southeast, actually in a lot of places across the country. And so what I don't want is, and I know that we've said multifamily has to have a SLUP, I just want to be careful that we're not setting ourselves up for potential conflicts where there's too much interest in housing, right? I don't think any of us see a place for 1,000 units of multifamily housing in the village. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out, if there's a way to message this correctly, where some housing is allowed by right, and that's the message we send. I strongly believe, I've told people forever that we need people living in the village to get the product we want. There's no question, but how we develop a code that reflects the product we want and the reality we live in Dunwoody is the key. So that's, how do we get where we're protecting our council, but more importantly, future councils? So.
Well, and another comment on that, and I think everybody here on the dais understands this, but I think public and others in the room, we all need to be aware that because of past zoning decisions by the county, we are at approximately 50-50 single family versus multifamily in the city of Dunwoody. And I don't think there's anybody in the metro area with those kind of numbers. Everybody else is down, at the high end, maybe a third multifamily, and I'm talking Decatur, Roswell, et cetera. Nobody has the level of multifamily residential that we do in Dunwoody. And if we're increasing that, we need to be real careful how we do it.
Tom?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a few things and ask a few questions. I'm basically piggybacking off of a lot of what John said. I mean, we've heard constantly what our citizens want. The majority of our citizens want in that village. They want a vibrant place where they can go to. Our own Dunwoody Center, similar to the other ones, the ones that a lot of our neighboring communities have. But I also agree that, and it's been stated, it's not going to happen. It'll never happen without a residential component to that. And I guess that's our difficult question here. John also alluded to, certain communities limiting the number, and that may be a good, because I think what Alpharetta does is they put an annual cap on that, but what they do is that cap can be exceeded if you borrow from future years. So for example, let's say the cap is 100 units, and I'm just going to make the math easy for myself. And someone wants to propose a 300 unit development. Well, that can be approved, but there will be no further development in that zone for 3 years because your cap's been allocated. So I think the benefit of that is it at least gives some reassurance to the community that once we approve a 300 unit, there's not going to be another 300 unit coming down the road next month, because guess what? There's going to be one for another 3 years. So at least it slows the roll, if you will, of that development and gives it at a more gradual pace. Richard, do you have any comments on that and how Alpharetta's done it and how that might impact the development here?
So Alpharetta does that only on the apartments, not on the overall development of residential. It's only the apartments that they do that for.
Okay. And when you calculated out the 3,000 units, I know you said you considered, what was likely and not likely to be developed. So if we look at the map, the blue, the Dv3, to the residential, pretty much by my look at that map, we're not going to be getting any additional residential there because the townhouse is already built. We're not tearing down the school center to sell to a developer and build townhouses. And we will, I hope that Dunwoody Methodist isn't going anywhere for a very, very long time. So was that a part of your number? Was it that those two areas were not going to be developed? Any of that 3,000 considered?
Correct. I took out School Art Center, Dunwoody Village Townhomes, and Dunwoody UMC. There was a 1.7 acre property, which I may have incorrectly assigned. It could be the parcel immediately north of the Art Center that I believe was separately owned. That is where all of the units in DV3 were assigned to.
And that's the AT&T building, and nothing is going to move that building.
Nothing's going there either, yeah. So Richard, I mean, obviously, when we hear about these communities and things that we want to do, you're a perfect resource for us because you've pretty much been the architect of two of them, Alpharetta and downtown Woodstock. And I mean, I think, there is some fear when you're talking about some of the changes that we're talking about, but when you see the results, I think there needs to be also a certain level of trust in the people and their experience that made it happen. And when you go to these areas, even if they, and I know the density isn't just when you're walking around. I know there's impact to infrastructure, to schools, it's traffic and all of that. But, when you go to these areas and you walk around and look at them with a critical eye, which I've done recently because of what we're talking about, again, I think it is what a lot of our residents are asking for. The density in Woodstock, how does that compare to we're looking at here in the village?
When we started the Hedgewood development up there, they were given an overall density of 12 units an acre, but they had 20 something acres. They did some single family and some townhomes, but then they did a 5-story on top of parking residential building of stacked flats. The entire density was over only 12 units an acre. But if you chopped it up, the building that has the 5 acres or 5 stories is over 54 units an acre. It just depends on how you chop up the acreage.
Right. Okay, yeah,
And Mayor and Council,
go ahead, Kelly.
I did want to provide a bit of information. I've gone back into the Excel file, and it is of note that almost half of the 3,000 units are actually from the Dunwoody Village Shopping Center, because that is so big. And that is the property where you could do 4 stories. So quite a bit of the density, the 3,000 units, have been assigned to that property based on how big it is today.
Is that the pink area?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, the single parcel in the middle here, it doesn't include any of the out parcels. There are about 1,300 units on there, which would be very unlikely to finance 1,300 units in there, but from a code perspective, it could accommodate it.
Okay, for now.
Yeah, I was gonna piggyback on what Tom said. He said that I was gonna mention is some kind of cap, and that was answered. And then I also wanted to flip basically what suggested that you regulate the purple so there's not, tons and tons of the whole public shopping center doesn't turn into a townhouse. I would do that, what you just mentioned, Caleb, in the D4, the pink. And that way we're keeping some density on the outskirts, and I love the orange detached homes because that's what I was going to mention as well. I think those would go overnight. But I was just, if we regulated the D4 as far as residential, both multifamily and condos and all the above, and then kept it to the outskirts. And the inside is your play in your restaurants and your park, and your fountain. So that's I agree with everyone up here. It's very exciting, but like Tom said, it can be a little scary.
It's how we message. So from our perspective, somebody up here said Alpharetta bought the land. Well, they spent their land during the recession was worth virtually nothing. Coming out of the recession, relatively speaking, compared to our land, it was worth virtually nothing, even coming out of the recession. But so understanding that there will be a push for the easiest product to get financed, right? I'm looking at staff like they're out there on the screen. Right, look at the ceiling, right? Understanding that, how do we message that what we want, so that everyone doesn't, and I don't think they're rushing in, but how do we end up with the product, the amount of the product we want? Because I think we can safely agree that 3,000 units is not anyone's idea of where we want to end up. It wouldn't, ironically, it would take exactly, it would turn on the head what we want this area to be. John mentioned we still need the Publix, and we need the businesses to serve the residents, and we need the residents to serve the businesses. And so, but how do we find that balance so that in the code, it's clear that we are not open for that much housing? And so we don't have to solve that tonight. I think there's some consensus, at least among some of us, that that's the question that needs to be answered. How do we message this properly? I realize that I'm trying to read into a developer's mind, but I've been on council since the recession ended, And I saw what happened in the Southeast. And I just want to be careful that we aren't opening ourselves up to challenges legally or otherwise, that we don't end up where we want to be. And also on the theme of the housing and the study and all that, when we look at Dunwoody and housing, we have an awful lot of traditional single family homes. We have an awful lot of apartments. We lack those home ownership opportunities that are smaller townhomes, we a fair amount, but condominiums in particular, stacked flats. How do we target and tailor this specifically enough that the word is out that that's what we're looking for? And so to me, because if we push that, what we really want is condominiums, at least first out of the gate, then maybe it answers some of the issues. Obviously, nobody's going to build 3,000 condominiums. So, but how do we get where we want to be? We don't solve it tonight. And I imagine there are other questions people have about the plan, but on the I think probably beating the residential. But that was something that was looming fairly large. And then understanding that some of the improvements that need to happen are public improvements, green space, better pedestrian access. Some will happen with development, some may happen on its own, that kind of thing. But the residential for me was one of the biggest sticking points. So anybody else, go for it.
Just people need to understand that when we talk about Alpharetta and how cool it is, they started in 2000. It's been 20 years. So yeah, they started in the year 2000 buying $200,000 rundown houses, acres on acre lots. So that's not our starting point. So, but we definitely look there. And
yeah.
Good point.
Richard, can you tell us what's the process for putting through a plan to limit the amount of multifamily, non-owner occupied, with Alpharetta put forward in terms of limiting future density or limiting the amount of residential units in the city of Dunwoody? Can you tell us a little bit how Alpharetta did that and what time frame would it take for us to explore doing the same?
Well, they essentially did a housing study. I think Eric Bozeman was on the panel that did that. I don't know how long it took them. It was gone by then. But it laid out what they were comfortable with and what the market would bear over the long term. And they adopted it.
I'm just thinking about the development that's allowed by right in other parts of the city and the amount of mix of owner occupied versus rental. And I think we need to at least study the matter to see if we need to put forward controls like other cities have. I mean, we really haven't explored it, so I'm wondering what, from the staff perspective, what would we need to do to even explore it?
Yeah, and the Mayor Deutsch and I have a meeting tomorrow with Krim, who we had zoned it for, I think, 900 condo units. He's probably going to come back again and say, I can't finance.
And if I may, I'll comment on that. We had a preliminary meeting with an apartment developer, very high-end apartments, and they were looking at doing, an over 55 project, very preliminary, very high-end. I would say the courtyard of their product looked like the spa area at the Ritz-Carlton Amelia. But one of the comments in discussions with them that I was not aware of is that from just a legal environment and liability standpoint in the construction business, that people will not build multifamily, they will not build multifamily condominiums because of the lawsuits that come from that product. That you can't get architects and engineers to work on those projects. You can't get contractors to build them because of the legal liability and lawsuits that come to pass down the road once those things transfer to control by the condominium association. So that's problematic as could be, and that really is, while we would love to have those, you can't get them built because of the legal environment, in the big picture. So I just, let's throw that out there for consideration.
And the 84 Perimeter filed their application yesterday with that high-end developer.
Richard, if I may, could I raise a couple points that were brought in public comment to see if we can get some clarification for the people that are sitting? Text in the document, in the sense of the 75-foot buffer on the north side by Dunwoody Hall, how hard would that be to add in? Is it an appropriate addition?
You said the 75-foot buffer?
75-foot buffer, north side of the village near Dunwoody Hall. Council, correct me if I'm mistaken.
Yeah. I'm not sure where the 75-foot buffer is, except for that's 150 feet.
Is it? It's the very north, right there, right where your mouse is. I believe, right at the top.
Right here.
Oh, Winter Hall's on the other side.
Yeah. No, it's probably 100 and close to 150 feet.
Yeah, I think she was worried about the 20-foot transition area. I thought that's what she talked about.
Yes.
And also it's still the road on the map.
Right, with the road on the map, but also the 20-foot buffer area. And I think we've never totally clarified publicly that there are two separate parcels on the west side of the village.
Correct.
They were developed at different times. The shops of Dunwoody and Dunwoody Hall had different agreements. They were built at a different time. And so somehow they've gotten lumped together, which was probably not necessarily so helpful for the discussion. But she's concerned about losing her buffer behind Publix.
Right.
Can y'all take a look at that at least and don't tell us tonight?
Yeah, we actually did take a look at it. Staff had one opinion, but Planning Commission passed it with an additional buffer, so they have that additional buffer.
Okay, and then the road to Winter Hall, in the sense of the text, I guess it was taken off the map, but.
Yeah, I don't have that on my map, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she's out in the beginning of the package where it was actually showing the history of where we were, and now this is in the draft, it's on.
Yeah, I apologize on the website because we wanted to keep everything on the site. So I had Jennifer actually separate everything that was new up at the top, so.
Right. I thought so.
So say, tell them.
Go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
right. So for public comments, it's in the map, but it's not in the text on the north side of Winter Hall, the buffer, the 75-foot buffer, ensuring that that is in the text of the plan as well.
Can y'all just take a look at that?
Yeah.
And then there was public comment regarding the car wash possibly coming forward on Mandina. It must be a commercial zoning in the sense of a possible rezoning now into the Dunwoody Village. Can you explain a landowner's rights on whether they're able to develop now versus later, or how would this affect them?
So one of the things we heard was that there are no drive-throughs or car uses. And that would be certainly a car use that has drive-throughs in them. So those would not be allowed in the future plans.
Okay, if they got in the application tomorrow, then since this hasn't passed, then what would have to.
It doesn't matter because we have the moratorium.
Got it. Understand. Thank you. I'm just trying to understand from the perspective from being the landowner or the resident. Yep. I think that's a lot of what I heard. I just want to make sure we clarified a couple of those. Look at a couple more of my notes. Thank you. That's it for me.
these are related because we have these issues that just arise citywide, but they definitely affect when we do the village as far as regulating the specific use. Okay, what is it zoned at, but what is the use, right? And what type of use, the retail, et cetera, the things we need to have for a future conversation, right? Looking at the use, part one. Part two, noise. What does that use affect? So the dogs, et cetera, noise. What is the use and how does it affect the neighbors nearby? Because we're not in the middle of the perimeter mall parking lot of having a bunch of yappy dogs, et cetera. It's adjacent to residential, whether this is in the village or you're near another place that's zoned elsewise. This is, again, a conflict zone is a transition. So I think we really need to look at noise impact as well. We need to look at tree protection citywide, have that conversation, and as well historic preservation. So we discussed even in the Shanley Dunwoody memo from Michael Smith said, you know, they're going to tweak around to save the railroad building, and yet that's still private, you know, and at the one extreme, unless I could be proven wrong, they could apply for land disturbance permit and tear it down tomorrow. So I just want to keep those things as a future conversation that we could hold as well, citywide, and also apply to the village.
Anybody have some else?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, and again, I think me and John are on the same wavelength tonight, it seems like. So Richard, just to confirm, so all of the concerns that we've heard primarily from the Branches neighborhood about the buffers, we have addressed those in the current plan we have before us tonight. And from what I hear, it meets the concerns that the neighbors had. I just want to confirm that that's where we are right now.
That's correct. I would double check with Bill Grossman, as speaker for the neighborhood. I know he was down there.
Yeah, Bill. Yeah, I think Bill's still here. Yeah, he's in the back. Oh, by the way, Bill, I like your idea about the linear park and that in the transition yard as well. I think that's a great idea there, and would be a great part of the transition between the residential and the commercial that could potentially be developed there. I did want to ask one other question too. I guess when we started the conversation about and I don't want to revisit it too much, but I wanted to, you know, I know Michael was primarily driving the conversation when we were talking about Chamberlain, Dunwoody, and Mount Vernon. I think this is important because we don't own the property here. We can't redevelop the property, but I think if the city can invest in the infrastructure surrounding it, that could certainly be a catalyst for development. So that's one thing we can do. And I think it's very important to do it right, because if we don't, then it might not have the effect we're hoping for. So is there anything substantial in your mind that we need to consider that might differ a little bit from what was discussed earlier?
I would say that doing Chamberlain Dunwoody exactly how you want it will unleash all of that private investment. If we spend that money and we bury those utilities, if we get those great street trees, it'll set the standard because everybody goes into the village that way. And that would be my key. That was what we did in Alpharetta before any of that. I came in and we did Highway 9. And that was the first.
Yeah, no, and we kind of saw that too. So I agree with you. I think it's important that we get it right. And, you know, so hopefully we'll look at all the options, including burying utilities. I know that's very expensive, but, you know, I'm aware of one community that got a grant and it may not be around anymore. I don't know how they got it or where from, specifically for burying utilities in a redevelopment area. So perhaps that's an opportunity we could explore as well. I don't know if it's still out there. It might have been Lilburn, but it was somewhere in that portion of the cab, I believe. But okay, yes, I'll end it there. But I do think that's an important part of this. Is we're not developers. The city, we're not going to redevelop the village itself. The market will determine that. But I think we can encourage the market by what we do control, and that's the infrastructure around it.
I guess, I'd like to know, I guess from all of us, where are we now? Like, we have a question on the residential. Nobody really talked about anything besides residential and clearing up some questions. What now?
Yeah, I mean, I think if that's all the questions and they can take the time needed to come back and present to us, perhaps a different strategy or some strategies where we are more clearly sending out in the world what we want back as it relates, because we know, like, we all probably have the envision in mind of what we want it to feel like on a Saturday night perhaps. But the how we get there and the residential component, I think it's a little murky in this, and I'd like some clarity on that. And then an additional concern that I've seen raised publicly is I know, this is aspirational, but I think on the map in the pink, there's that one little strip for a park. And, for me, obviously the city might need an investor to make it happen, but that's key. And then is that really where it goes? If the city is the investor, that kind of thing. So, or if it's so aspirational, we don't have to decide that today or when we pass this. But having, I think what people want, I think I can speak that we all kind of understand we had to have more people living there to get the Alpharetta effect on Saturday night or Sunday, and Alpharetta is just one example. There's lots of indicator, but we know we want places where families can gather. We want places where people can have a glass of wine while they're waiting for their restaurants, sitting at a park, that kind of thing. So how do we get there is the next step. But does it matter on the map if you haven't been ambitious enough with green space, Richard?
Well, the green space is showing there because that was the largest part.
Right.
All the parcels are required to have anywhere from 10 to 15% of space.
But when you go ahead. But when you look at Alpharetta, which I think we just all went to, but there's other places where there's big green strips that aren't necessarily associated with the community owns it, for example. So is the green space that we have designated sufficient enough to spur the development that we want to see happen? Because that's part of it. It's the walkability and the pedestrian safety is all really important, but I also happen to think the green space is really important too. To spur the city's got to be part of this, I think. We don't own the property, but how we make it happen.
The other aspect is that life is a little different these days for restaurants. Maybe we should mandate a little bit more outside seating in golf house.
Or allow a little bit more.
Somehow.
Yes, and we're doing it. So my friend Mr. Williams is here and he's gone out of his way at the shops at Dunwoody to allow breadwinners just expanded again their outdoor seating and the picnic tables. My son went to Park Place the other night on a Saturday night and they have packed it with seating apparently in the courtyard. And so we just don't want to be a barrier. Which is why I asked sort of when we were talking about at the beginning of this discussion, when we were talking about the setbacks, could a restaurant be further back so that it could be wider and have more outdoor seating, that kind of thing. So, right, we don't want to be a barrier. So Richard, was there anything else people had concerns or questions about?
You'd wanted to, Michael and I, Starling and I, to take a deep dive on those permitted uses. So in zoning, we zone it for restaurant, say. We don't say which restaurants can come in. We could distinguish between fast food and sit-down restaurants, but we don't say which ones can come in. Same thing with the medical facilities. That person could have bought that property. The market is going to do what the market does. I would be very hesitant to regulate those. Unlike what we did with the banks, we didn't eliminate banks. We just said they had to be quarter-mile apart. So it's very, what's a nice way to say it?
It's complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated. So,
So Lynn asked a question, and I'd kind of like to pose it to you, Richard, like, are we limiting restaurants with outdoor space with our setbacks? Are we putting up a barrier, or are we flexible enough with setbacks that we can provide enough ample space for our outdoor eating?
oh yeah, it's much more available now or in the future with this plan than it is now.
Okay. All right, so.
Just like my second Stacy's, right? What's next?
So, did anybody else have anything? Did you have anything else, Tom, on the use question?
No, I guess really so we have had some questions about that. And of course, we always see all of the comments about the banks and everything else. And so, yeah, and the urgent care has taken over for banks lately. But so I was just kind of curious, the vehicle we use to, I guess, get the end product we want, what legally we do. And I think you've answered that as far as just not necessarily saying you can't build a bank, but you can't build one within a quarter mile or what exists. And that's how you can kind of control what goes in there. So I think that's sufficient for what I was looking for. And I know there are other things you've done too, as far as the usable space and not allowing big boxes and all that kind of stuff as well. So I think that's a part of this as well. So, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Yeah, a Home Depot will never go in there because they're too big. So.
And so I think next is y'all regroup and address the residential component. And then I think if that's all, we look at it again and then we can vote on it at some point this year. Does that sound right? Does that sound right, y'all?
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the big one.
I have one other question about ground level retail, because there's been a lot of information, even in the last few months, about how difficult that market is. And some of it has to do with the number of people present to shop at the businesses. But one of the points that I read is that we aren't going to tell the landlords how to use, like how to break up the space, right? So one of the things I read is that if you allow smaller, businesses, the businesses are more likely to succeed than if they're bigger businesses, bigger in terms of square footage. I'm sorry, not defining the business size per se, but that, if you allow an ice cream, if you aren't, right, if you're showing something.
Right. Yeah, one of the things when I came here, I was amazed at how large your restaurants were, especially in the perimeter area.
Right.
Bruce Williams rezoned that one in front of the hotel for a 10,000-foot restaurant. That's just astronomically huge to me. We could much smaller will make them more feasible. But if a big restaurant wants to come in, they can come in. We just don't make them have to live up to those.
But you're not going to have a minimum square footage for a use of a commercial space.
No.
Okay, that's all. All right, so the next step.
If I may add.
Go ahead.
If I may add, one thing we did do to, I think, encourage more creative and usable ground floor commercial rather than, the usual suspects that you see, the Metro PCSs, the subway, all that sort of thing, is when you look at the building type standards, which I pulled up, you'll notice that we've actually set a minimum ground floor ceiling height. And the reason for that is we've had a lot of conversations with small businesses, and they value the creativity that higher floor to ceiling heights offer. And this is one of the primary indicators of the sort of quality of the commercial space is that floor to ceiling height. So we have accommodated that as a direct response to creating spaces that are usable for small businesses that are consistent with sort of the vision of the village.
That is, that's good. That's a good solution. It's just lately been in a lot of the planning literature. All right, anybody else? So you'll work on this. You don't have to bring it back to us in 2 weeks. You can bring it back to us in 4 weeks. It's the 2 meetings from now is sufficient. And anybody else? Anything else?
Just a reminder that we only have one meeting.
No, we have two now, but we have 2 still in October, believe it or not.
Okay.
We haven't had our first regular October meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, it's not on Monday, October 12th, which was the day that was set.
Right.
I think Councilmember Jim recommended that one.
Right. So wait, what? The council meeting is not Monday, or you're not bringing it back Monday?
No, I'm asking, do you want it Monday? Because that,
No, that's like 3 days from now. No,
Right.
that's too quick. So no, that's what I'm saying. So bring it back to us. The last meeting in October is fine. If you're ready, the first meeting in November, if you're not. Because we have 2 meetings this year in November.
And then also with Michael Smith, that infrastructure. You know,
Yes.
the gateway.
Right.
Yes.
And a little background on the density for owner occupied, non-owner occupied, how other cities do that in the sense of things done by right, things allowed by right versus future development.
Yeah, what I would like to do there is put together a bunch of options that we've seen and coordinate with staff to give you some real opportunity, different options to think about and pros and cons of each.
That works for me. Okay. All right, so I think we're finished with item 3. And I think we need to read 4 and 5, probably, or 4 next. Let's see.
Mayor, the next item is a resolution to adopt updates to the Dunwoody Village.
Information, Sharon, just for the public that's here, we're gonna read these. I don't think we're gonna be discussing them too much. If somebody wants to be public comment, they can stay for the next 3 minutes and public comment will be open and.
Yes.
So there's no reading. Just-
Right.
there's-
The meeting's almost over.
Meeting's almost over. Why I realize we might be thinking we're going on for the next 4 hours.
yeah, I don't think we need to discuss them. I mean, one of them was rezoning essentially the majority of the plan to that plan.
Right, Sharon, if you want to just read them so that we can, I think we have to check them off. the agenda.
Yeah.
All right.
So yes, item 4 was a resolution to adopt the updates to the Dunwoody Village Master Plan. And number 5 is RZ 20-01, an ordinance to amend the official city of Dunwoody zoning map to rezone multiple parcels within Dunwoody Village to create newly adopted Dunwoody Village District as contemplated in the new Dunwoody Village zoning regulations.
Anybody have anything else? Nope. All right. Public comments? Oh, actually, I forgot about Zoom. I think everybody left here, but Ginger, do you want to check on Zoom?
Yes, we do have someone with their hand raised at this time. Roxanne, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Hello, council. This is actually Casey Lockeranini, Roxanne's husband. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to just get it out there that I've been only intermittently able to access the meeting tonight. But I do know that I heard a phrase near and dear to my heart, which is urgent care, mentioned a few times. And I want to thank all of you. I know that I sent a long email to council, and I want to thank all of you for considering that carefully and getting back to me on that. I just had a couple of questions. I know it's late. I don't want to take a lot of your time. But there was discussion earlier about the concept of regulating or legislating or controlling the businesses that come in or out of Dunwoody. And one of the comments made was about the bank system or the large number of banks that are present in Dunwoody. And what I heard was that there was and has been regulations put in place that regulate how close banks can be to each other. Am I correct in that?
So unfortunately, due to Georgia's Open Meetings Act, we can't necessarily respond this way, but I can send you an email later.
Okay, that'd be great. Well, let me just say this then under the premise that the city has the legal authority to regulate the spacing of banks, it would seem that that same consideration might be given to other types of businesses. So that's one point. So careful thought might be given to other types of businesses that might be exceeding a density that would be beneficial to the city. The other thing is that in my case, obviously I own Dunwoody Urgent Care, and it's a business, yes, but it's also a medical practice, and medical practices are unique. And one of the concepts that is frequently invoked in regulating medical care in the community is a certificate of need. So, hospitals are subject to that. You can't put a hospital wherever you want. The
30 seconds remaining.
Hospital has to apply for a certificate of need, demonstrating that there is need for their services and making it rational for them to build a hospital there. So it doesn't seem a huge stretch that that same principle might be applied to medical practices or other medical facilities within the city limits. I would encourage you to consider that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, next we have Alan Holloway. You should be able to unmute and speak at this time.
Hello, this is Alan Holloway. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. First, I wanted to thanks everybody for all your hard work on this plan. I know it's arduous. But I just have one comment about green space. I wanted to second the earlier discussion about the maybe the need for additional green space. It seems like in proportion to the land area in the redevelopment, the amount of green space this earmarked seems rather small. And then a question that I have, I concur with Madam Mayor's concern about density, residential housing density in the village. But I think what I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, that certain types of residential housing like condominiums or age restricted would be allowed by right, but rental apartments would require a special land use permit. And I just want to understand why, if the density's the same, why would we as a community restrict apartment development versus condominium development? And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have one more person with their hand raised at this time. Actually, yes, you can go ahead and unmute and speak.
Is that me that you just called on?
Yes, sir. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Dick Thayer, and I am chairman of the board of trustees at Dunwoody Methodist. And hi, Richard. We met with Richard McLeod on Monday night, the board did. And there has been a lot of question as to whether the church is in or out of the DVOD. And it is our position now that if it's the will of the council going forward to put us back into the DVOD, that we have no objection to that. So I just wanted to pass that along.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Is that it, Jean?
I show no other hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Okay. Eric, do you have any comments for us?
No comments tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Council comments?
Three things. Well, this is a work session, hooray. So let's have conversations. I know it's tough work, right? But we've got to do it. I'm really glad that we had this separate breakout. Really keep on equating us to the board of directors, looking at strategic vision and direction of the city. And these kind of events are really great. If we need to do it as we need it, I appreciate that. I believe the next public, we've got the budget coming up, I think on the 12th, I believe we've got our FY21 budget. So for the public to know, there's a public hearing scheduled on Monday the 12th, I believe. I haven't been notified yet, but if you want to look at our FY2021 budget, that'll be posted very soon. Please be involved, read it, look at it, because we've got some tight things we're going to be working with. It's a challenging time, and people want us to continue doing things. So really be involved, right? We want to get things done. And then voting. Early voting in person starts Monday the 12th. So you can go to decabvotes.com. That's one place. The 12th, that starts right here at the Dunwoody Library. It's called North DeKalb, because I can't find Dunwoody. It's North DeKalb. Starts at 12th. It's Monday through Friday, all month of October till the 30th. And then it's Saturday on the 17th and 24th, and Sunday, even the 18th and 25th. So we'll be voting in person, have a voting plan, and of course, we've got those absentee ballot drop boxes right here at the City Hall there for you too. Thank you.
For those of you who haven't seen it, the City of Dunwoody has this cool app. And on the app, then you can download all the locations of the picnic tables in Dunwoody and go support our local businesses and take a picture of yourself eating lunch at the picnic table. And it's a beautiful time of the year to do it. So get out there, help businesses, enjoy lunch.
Yeah, just like to remind everyone, if you haven't done your census yet, the deadline has been extended. Thanks to a court ruling. So you now have until October 31st to complete that. I know you've probably heard a lot about the census, but it is very, very important. That's where tax dollars come from. That's where representation comes from. So I would encourage everyone. It literally takes 10 minutes. You do it online. But that 10 minutes is for the next 10 years. So it's time well spent. So if you haven't done it, the courts have given you a few extra days to do that, so please take advantage. Thanks.
I just wanted to say thank you to Lynn and Chief for last Thursday at Brookhaven during that presentation. And with that said, I wanted to tell the community to go to our website, and you will see this weekend is, oh, Chief, if I get it right, it's National Faith in Blue Weekend. Is that correct? And so there's 2 opportunities for the citizens to participate: Sunday night or late afternoon 4 to 6, and Monday, I get right down the time. But if you go to our website, there's opportunities to participate via Zoom with our faith base and our police and community all tied together for open discussions.
Thank you. Y'all did great with the comments tonight. I got nothing. All right. I know we need no executive session, so I
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn by Jim. Second by Pam. Anyone dissenting? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Sharon, that's unanimous, and that's a wrap.